Hi, good afternoon. This is Meredith Lego, and welcome to my channel. My channel focuses on the overall expansion of consciousness and Ascension science. And a lot of the content that I am bringing forward is really content that I've been able to basically channel from a collective consciousness of beings, and in some cases ascended masters. And today I'm going to be bringing forward a topic about soulless beings. Another term that has come up in sort of popular culture or in the collective consciousness as of late has been the term NPCs, or non-player characters. And I'm going to be talking about this video because it was actually a question that one of the viewers of my channel posed as a question that I could basically ask. So the overall question that the viewer was curious about is, are there beings without souls? What is the agenda of beings with souls versus without souls? And how can you tell the difference in the agenda? Now, the question itself didn't necessarily reference NPCs or non-player characters, but I'm going to get into that a little bit because in some ways I think that the topic is connected, and I was shown by my spiritual team, if you will, how that actually enters into our reality, the concept of NPCs. So I'll touch upon that at the end. So the answer to that question that I received is that the soul is part of the overall complex of a being. And before I go on, I want to basically pause right there. So I've done many videos, and throughout the course of the videos, I've talked about the fact that we are a multi-dimensional being, which means that we've got many aspects to us. We certainly have our physical body. We know ourselves as the person who we are. Like we were born, we were given a name. Through that, we've grown up and had an identity that we've established. For example, you might know yourself as a mom or a dad or a brother or sister. You might know yourself as a student or, in a particular career. So that is an identity and an archetype that you've constructed over time. And in many ways, that is what my guides basically, originally Ascended Master Hilarion, referred to me as the ego personality complex. So that is one aspect of your being. But as we've learned along the way, there are also other aspects of the being. And those aspects start to come in over time as you start to essentially unblock some energies and gain through that unblockage a higher flow of frequency and therefore consciousness. So energy is nothing more than consciousness, is nothing more than energy. So the two go hand in hand. And so as you start to essentially gain higher frequency energy flowing through your body, you're also gaining higher consciousness that flows through your body. And so the higher up the consciousness ladder that you're essentially going, you're bringing in different aspects of your multidimensional beingness, if you will. And so that can start off by, let's say, just first integrating with your soul. And then that can go on to an integration with a higher complex, which is known as an oversoul. And in those cases, you start to have memories of other life situations in which you're tapping into other aspects or other lives that you've lived as part of an oversoul consciousness, if you will. So what the group that I am connected with, this collective consciousness group, is saying is that the soul is part of an overall complex of a being. So it's one aspect of an oversoul group, which is one aspect of even a higher group. And so the more and more that you go up, the more that you realize that the soul is just a small fractal of something that's much larger. It's a small piece of a larger puzzle, if you will. They go on to say that soul energy merges within a human body over time in a normal progression. So as you're growing up, as you're a small child growing up into an adult, and then a more mature adult or a senior, you're going to have certain learnings that go on along that way. And through that, you might gain a much richer appreciation for interacting with those around you and the kind of cause and effect situations that play out in life. So if you do something, you realize there could be consequences to that, and there could be consequences that impact other people. So through that learning process, through the idea of having an experience, going through the experience, integrating that experience, and processing the learning of that experience into basically your essence, your being, you essentially start to through that process, you can start to essentially integrate more aspects of your higher consciousness, because depending upon what form that learning takes, you could be integrating aspects of that higher frequency energy through that process of just evolving within your one life. And that's basically what that statement means. So soul energy merges within the human body over time in a normal progression. When a soul is not fully able to integrate into or descend into the physical body and dimensional place in full, the being is made up primarily of their ego personality complex. So in other words, if a being is not able to essentially integrate in higher aspects of consciousness or higher energy frequencies, then what remains really is just the essence of the ego. So in my case, it would be me knowing myself as Meredith Lego, and that's pretty much all there is. One can say that they are soulless, and it is not to be judged. It is simply a fact that the being has not connected with or is receiving the full complement of soul frequencies. So that's basically what they say. And one of the things that I wanted to make a note of saying is that the higher frequencies, or the potential for those higher frequencies, always exists and is connected in with the body. And essentially it sits within what are known as the seed cells in the perineum area, basically near the root chakra. And I've touched upon those seed cells in previous videos on how to stop the reincarnation process. But essentially what happens is that as you start to go through experiences that perhaps help you realize that there's more to this world, there's more to this reality than just you, the ego personality construct, for example, you start to awaken those higher frequency energies and higher consciousness that sits within the seed cells in your perineum. And as you start to explore that more, that energy starts to slowly rise up your kind of the center of your body. It's called the nadial complex, but it starts to rise up the center body. And that's often what's also referred to as the Kundalini experience, if you will. So what they're saying is that, you know, if that process doesn't start to happen, and if an individual is walking through life knowing themselves just to be their ego, who they are, not realizing that there's more to them than just that, they could be considered soulless. But I think the key thing, and it's very important here in the statement, is that that is not to be judged, okay? Because it could be that many of us listening to this video have been soulless, if you will, you know, for much of our lives. And there are individuals that we could be interacting with day to day who are quote unquote soulless, and they just haven't gotten to that point of awakening to that. So we all have different points along our evolution as consciousness in which we come to that understanding, or we re-remember or awaken that part of us. And so that's the point of saying, don't judge it, have compassion, because everybody's been in that situation or in that boat. And the time will come when that higher frequency energy starts to take root or take form within the physical form of a being. They go on to say that some species have developed the ability for their consciousness to be extracted from their physical bodies and transferred into another species. The bodies or androids are quote unquote soulless until the spark of light body consciousness is activated through the natal complex and into the central nervous system. And so in that particular sentence, they're referencing the fact that there are some beings who have developed a technology that essentially can extract consciousness from out of like a being. So for example, me, Meredith Lego, there could be a technology that can essentially extract everything that I know about me, my memories, my experiences, and essentially extract it out of me and put it into essentially another body. So, I think that concept has been seeded more and more to the consciousness of humanity with several recent movies that have come out. Probably the most, the largest movie, if you will, would be the movie Avatar, where that's playing out. But there certainly have been other movies in which this concept has been shown. And so they're basically saying that the bodies, like the android, the physical body, are quote unquote soulless until the spark of light body consciousness activates. And that process happens within this natal structure that kind of runs up and down the center of the physical body. But that same natal structure is going to exist in the energetic blueprint. So it would be almost like you've got let's say you have a blueprint that helps inform how a house is going to be built. We essentially have a blueprint that informs, it's an energetic blueprint that we can't necessarily see, that informs basically how the physical body is going to be displayed as well. So they go on to say that still, if a being is only developed into the ego complex and has not fully integrated the soul frequencies, the android form is still soulless. The agendas of both a soul-based and a soulless being is simply to survive. There is an innate desire to maintain and remain in physical form. However, with the statement, there are some differences. A soulless being, primarily run from an ego personality complex, is driven to survive because there is a fear of death. This denotes the belief and the feeling of separation. And so just to pause right there, for many, many years, this was me. And essentially when I started to basically have a desire that there's something more than just my identity, if you will, my ego. I actually went through an exercise of basically unpacking the 5 whys, which is a really good exercise to go through, but it's nothing more than an exercise to get to the root cause of what creates fear in your life. And so let's say you have a fear of losing your job. Well, then you'd ask, well, why do I fear losing my job? And you'd say, well, I fear, being in a situation where I'm poor. Well, why do I fear being poor? Well, because I fear not, being able to have a roof over my head or have, food. Well, why do I fear that? Because I fear dying, so you kind of unpack all of those fears. Now for me, when I did that, it did, one of the fears that came up was the fear of death. So that makes sense. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the ego itself fears dying. the ego, in our world is very much kind of running the boat, if you will. And essentially, when you start giving up control of decision making to the ego and start giving in to the feelings that you have day to day, and your soul speaks to you with feelings, not mental decision making, but feelings. And when you start to listen to your feelings and allow them to actually drive the decisions in the direction of how you kind of think, feel, and act day to day, it does create a lot of fear within the ego, because the ego, essentially is going through a death process through that experience. So not only is there the death process of not being in control of what the physical body does every day, or what the person does every day to day, but then there's just the fear of literally dying, including the physical body. So they go on. So again, a soulless being primarily run from an ego personality complex is driven to survive because there is a fear of death. This denotes the belief and the feeling of separation. But it is not until the soul consciousness grabs a hold and integrates into the body that survival is not coming from fears within the root and the sacral. So those are referencing the two chakras that exist, which are some of the that drive the kind of subconscious behaviors or desires that we have to just stay alive. A being integrated with the soul body has opened the heart, so there is a richer appreciation for other lives and the well-being of others. These beings are more adept at understanding and feeling what it is like to be in the shoes of other beings, so there is a richer sense of compassion. Once higher forms of consciousness integrate into the being, such as the monad and the oversoul, the being understands that consciousness is eternal, and the fear of death diminishes, if not ends completely. The agenda for a soul being transforms to experience and unity consciousness of the whole in order to ensure efficiency evolution. So that last statement really gets to what the agenda of a soul-based being is, which is essentially it's to, at the first layer, it's to your heart chakra is starting to open, so there is a lot more just listening to your heart and to your feelings, and kind of driving decision making off of that. But at the same time, you're starting to feel more empathic. The being would start to feel more empathic around others that they interact with, and that starts to drive more of the day-to-day decision making on how to exchange or deal with day-to-day situations with others. So there might be more of a feeling of, gee, if I do this could make them feel this way, so therefore I'm going to react this way. And obviously that's a interesting process where that soul will have to figure out and start to learn how to do that in such a way that also creates boundaries for themselves as well. Oftentimes, highly empathic souls, while they can feel what others are feeling around them, they can also start to essentially lose their own sense of control, because essentially they allow others to basically manipulate them, or not so much manipulate, but use and abuse them, so to speak. So, if you're an individual who really wants to please others because you feel the pain in others if they're not happy, then you can essentially find yourself constantly trying to please others and never having enough time to please yourself. So in other words, those beings that are transitioning to become more soul-based, while they feel others and can have compassion for others, they also have to learn to create boundaries over their own space, because it's you can't do good in the world if you're also not making sure that you are a healthy being. That means having a healthy physical body, emotional body, and mental body as well. So essentially, that's probably the first set of integration that the being is having, and therefore the agendas that are playing out. But essentially, the other thing that came in around the agendas, that is essentially, as even higher soul frequencies essentially start to integrate into the body, you're going to start to experience more of the monad or overall soul frequencies. And when that happens, during that experience, or at least the way that I experienced it, is that you start to remember other lives. You start to remember other lives within sort of the oversoul group. And when you do that, you very quickly realize, now wait a minute, not only am I not going to die, but I understand, or I could see what it's really like. I am walking in somebody's shoes, and it's not even that I'm thinking about what the experience would be like for somebody else. Like, I literally remember walking in those shoes. I remember being in a body like that. I remember what it was like to go through that. And you start to remember those experiences. And so through that, you have a much different, a perspective or experience of what it means to be other, not just other humans, but other beings. So you might have had experience of being in a non-human body, and therefore, you have compassion around that experience as well. And through that, you start to get a much richer appreciation for the need or the desire, the innate desire that all species have for oneness, for love, for unity, for connection. And so that becomes more of the agenda or the drive, making everybody feel a part of the whole, if you will. And through that, you also, through that process, are just trying to essentially lower essentially the pain that goes into evolution. And I call it, you're lowering the entropy, which is a system that can sort of devolve if essentially a system starts to decay over time, as opposed to a system that flourishes over time, because all the parts, all the pieces, all the pieces within the system are flourishing. So you want every part of a broader system or a broader consciousness to flourish, because when they do, the whole group flourishes, if you will, in their oneness. You can kind of think about this as a society. Essentially, we want all humans across the earth and all countries essentially to flourish, because when everybody is flourishing, then the whole world flourishes, all of humanity flourishes. But let's not just extend that to humanity, it's extending that thinking to all life, all sentient life, at least. Let's just start there, all sentient life on earth to flourish, because when the bees are flourishing, then we're flourishing, because there's a symbiotic relationship, because the flowers are flourishing. So that would be an example. So essentially, hopefully, that answers the question about the concept of beings with souls versus without souls, and what the agenda might be. And I think the most important thing with all of this is the statement about not having judgment. So every being, every consciousness unit, if you will, is going to go through a journey, a soul evolution journey, if you will, and they're going to have experiences that help them gain a much richer appreciation for the size and the magnitude of how large consciousness is. And they're going to go through that at their own time. And some individuals may not be there yet. Some beings may not be there yet. But I think what their coaching is, don't judge, but have compassion for the knowingness that it's, they'll get there at some point in the right time in their soul's evolution. It may not be this life, it may not be the next life, but they'll eventually get there. And oftentimes, while they're getting there, they could be going through a lot of pain and suffering along the way. And it may not be physical pain, it could be emotional pain or mental pain, but essentially have compassion during that process. But also at the same time, obviously, we live in a world where that still is going on with, a lot of humanity, and you still have to do stuff that's going to essentially create boundaries for your own beingness, in order to protect yourself so that you're also not being controlled and manipulated by others who don't have that awareness yet. I think that's another, well, it didn't come up in the lesson itself. I think it's another key message that has been brought up, by other teachers that I've shared with along the way. The last thing I want to really address is the concept of quote unquote non-player characters. So I did have the experience one time of being shown by guides while I was in kind of a dream state, but it was a very strong lucid dreaming / astral experience in which I was shown basically different technologies that are used in order to put quote unquote non-player characters into our reality within kind of the holographic simulation that we're in. And so, in some cases, there are, different beings that are, put into our reality, if you will, or that we're connected with in order to facilitate lessons. And they showed me holographically how this was done, and there was different technology that's being used in order to sort of do this. In some cases, it's almost like, in some cases it could be individuals that we're interacting with, but in other cases it could be sort of implanted images is the feeling that I got. So, whether that's sort of manipulated or controlled or, part of the experience, I don't know the answer to that. There's still more exploring that I have to do on this one question. But, as I was seeing this play out and I was very lucid during the experience, I asked the question, are these like non-player characters? And essentially, they acknowledge that, yes, that's essentially what this is. So, I have to do a little bit more research on this with this collective consciousness, and we'll do so in the future. But, I did get the sense and was told essentially that quote unquote, these non-player characters are entered into our reality to help with facilitating learnings for beings as well. So with that, hopefully that answers, more questions or provides more learnings that you certainly have about expanded consciousness and ascension, and how the whole concept of souls versus soulless beings, start to evolve, and what the various agendas are of beings who either are soul or soulless. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, your evening, and I'll see you in future videos. Thanks very much. Bye.